I have tissue right here. Okay, here we go. All right, so today this is talking about the period of the sinusoidal functions. That's how you say that. What is the period of a graph? Well, if you look at any kind of sine or cosine graph, they're going to do this sort of thing, right? And they're going to repeat over and over and over again. Okay? I want you to notice that there are really four equal parts. Four parts that are the same distance or the same amount of time in the graph. Okay, let's look at the first part. If you go from the maximum to the what's that line called? Midline. That's the midline of the graph. When you go from the maximum to the midline, that's one part of the period. What's the next part of the period? Midline to the minimum, right? So we have two equal parts, and they are the same distance horizontally. So, for example, if this distance here is 2, guess what this distance is? 2. And then from the minimum up to the midline is also an equal part. And then the last part is from the midline back up to the maximum. And if I just look on the x-axis here, they would be equally spaced, all four parts. And if this was the case, I would say that the period, the amount of time it takes to repeat, is how long? Let me give you the definition one more time. The period is the amount of time it takes a graph to repeat itself. 8. Why is it 8? Because it went from the maximum down through the graph and back up to the maximum. How long is that? That's 8. But that 8 is divided into 4 equal parts of 2 in this particular example that I just made up. Okay? That's important. Take a look at our first example on con. It's going from the maximum to the minimum. Let me zoom out a little bit so I can draw in there. Maximum to the minimum. Is that 1/4 of the period? Or is it something else? It's half of the period, right? It went from the maximum, just like here, down to the minimum. That's halfway, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how far apart are these two. And 2 days ago, we talked about amplitude and the midline, and we only looked at the y coordinates. You remember that? That's the only thing we did. Today, we're talking about a horizontal distance. That's what the period is. So since we're talking about a horizontal distance, what coordinates are we going to look at? The x coordinates. All right, so let me zoom back in. If we look at the x coordinates here, it went from negative pi to pi. Now you can do this one of two ways. You could subtract in either order. I like to go from the right point minus the left point. Okay, so pi minus negative pi. That's what you can write down right now. Check that out. Okay, draw yourself a little graph, label that point down there, and then write down what I just did there. All right, I'll pause it. If you do that, remember it's two negatives, right? So it turns into, so it tells us the period from there to there. That distance is 2 pi. Is that our answer? No. So I prefaced this problem before we began by saying this was half of the whole period, right? This is half of it. So our answer is going to be double what we just got, right? It's going to be 4 pi. Remember, a full period would be a full repeat of the cycle. So we'd have to go down and then all the way back up. That's one period. And it would be another 2 pi in this direction. So the total is is 4 pi. Okay? Now, sometimes they're going to give you 2 points that are not a half, but like a fourth of the cycle. And that's why I split it into fourths over here to begin with. Okay, let's do another one. What is the period of the graph? So again, let's do a little quicker. Ignore the y coordinates. Now let's do this. Let's do the point on the right minus the point on the left. So the point on the right is this one, right? That's 5/4 pi minus 1 pi. Now, if you're doing this freaks people out. How do you subtract those things? Think of them like terms. Don't involve the pi with it at all. Okay, so what you should be thinking is, what is 5/4 minus 1? It's 1/4. Now, why is it 1/4? Yeah, 1 is the same thing as 4/4, isn't it? Isn't that the same thing? So if you take away 4/4 from 5/4, you get 1/4. Now, it's not just 1/4, it's 1/4. Yeah, so it's 1/4 pi. Now, think with me here. Here was the beginning. It went up. It's going to go all the way back down, and it has to get back to where it started, right? What fraction of the period are these 2 points? It's 1/4 of the period, yeah. So let me do this so I can draw on it. All right, from here to here, that's one part. That's going up, and then back down. That's another stage in the period, and then another one, right? And then once we get right back here, we've had an entire period. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to that, correct? And the first 2 are just 1/4 of the period. So our answer here, we need to multiply by 4. So what's 1/4 pi times 4? The last one, it was half of a period, right? So we multiplied by 2. This one's times 4. Well, what's a fourth times 4? 1. There we go. So it's just going to be 1 pi, or pi. And that'll be your answer. All right. Sometimes it'll just be numbers, and it'll be a heck of a lot easier in our brains. But this is the last one I'm going to do. It's a little tricky because they're both in the center. So let's do this again. Let's go right minus left. Remember, we're looking at the x coordinates when we're talking about the period of a graph. So that's 5.9 minus 3.7. You would get 2.2. What do we multiply it by? Mason says 2. He's right, and here's why. If we start here and we go up, back down, are we done with the period? No, we need to go all the way down to the minimum and then right back up to where we began. So this right here is exactly half of the whole period, right? The distance in between our 2 points is half. So that tells us our answer needs to be multiplied by 2. Take that times 2. What do you get? 4.4. There we go. Okay, you want to try this one for a little bit? The hardest part is going to be 2 things. Do I multiply it by 4 or by 2? And then secondly, doing the math with pi involved. It freaks everybody out. Some of your calculators will do it for you. If you need help with that, let me know.